Hello to everyone and welcome to the third talk in the series of thematic conversations in the context of the New Age Works exhibition at the International Centre for the Image, organized by PhotoIreland and with the kind support of the Arts Council. Through the talk series, we aim to tease out the work and practice of the 10 artists participating, who are Austin Hearn, Billy Kenrick, Kier Richardson, David Castro, Dorje de Bourg, Emily O'Connell, Garry Loughlin, Kate Nolan, Mandy O'Neill, and Miriam O'Connor. Souvenirs Works is a triennial project run by PhotoIreland. It's now in its fifth edition, and it represents the growing diversity of contemporary photographic practices in Ireland. You can find out more about the artists and the projects and the issues discussed in this series of free talks online at image.museum. And as I mentioned, we continue the talk series with a conversation entitled On Place and Territory with artists Billy Kenrick and Garry Loughlin. And without further ado, we are going to start with Billy Kenrick.
Thanks, man. I'm just going to start off introducing myself, my practice a little bit, just with a couple of short statements about my practice and the project itself, just to get people in the loop who aren't familiar with the work so far. So I'm just going to read these brief statements. So I'm a visual artist specializing in analog photographic techniques, print media, bookmaking, moving image, as well as experimental sound. My practice involves a process-led approach focusing on the iterative material aspects of images. The work explores the interplay between subjectivity and environment, perception and representation, as well as themes of absence and erasure. So that's just a brief introduction to my practice. And then just about the project itself, which is called The Very End of Everything. In this project, I explore the concept of peripheral space, the idealization of place, and the elusive nature of artistic revelation. Through a combination of techniques, formats, and processes, a sense of fragmentation and shifting perspective emerges. The work seeks to examine the indeterminate material nature of images and their capacity to describe subjective experience. The project is partly inspired by the story of French author Antonin Artaud's 1937 visit to Ireland, which ended in his arrest and deportation. Artaud claimed to possess a holy relic, St. Patrick's crozier or Bacchal Istu, and sought to return the item to its native land. Artaud was ultimately drawn to the island of Inishmore, seeking out what he imagined to be an isolated, somewhat idyllic place. He claimed to be on the brink of a visionary breakthrough, writing from Galway to André Breton, "You are going to see, once you have examined the magic spell, that things are about to become serious, and this time I'm going to the very end of everything." So the structure of this project is based on this kind of journey or episode and features images from related locations. It's also informed by historical research and is framed more broadly as a study of the marginalized role of the artist within society. So basically, I'm just going to start with some kind of background context for those of you who may not be all that familiar with Artaud. And this is just a kind of nice little summary by his biographer, Stephen Barber, who kind of describes the kind of rationale involved in Artaud's visit. So he says it was the cane which had reputedly belonged to St. Patrick that largely motivated Artaud's final journey to Ireland. He decided that he would return the cane to the Irish to awaken them in his appeals for revolution. He was calmly aware that it would be his last journey and announced it as such to his friends. He was to leave Paris as the scene of his humiliations to confront what he viewed as another wild and uncivilized landscape, the islands off the western coast of Ireland. There he could watch his prophecy materialize. He left Paris abruptly and took a boat to Ireland, arriving at the port of Cove on 14th of August. When he finally returned to Paris, it was to be as an inmate of the St. Anne Asylum. So that's kind of like the broad strokes for that. In addition to that, I have here a couple of additional images just to fill in some other kind of bits on this. The one on the top left is a still perhaps a promotional still from the Robert Flaherty film Man of Iron, which had been released in 1934, just 3 years prior. And this was Artaud's kind of main introduction to the the location, to the existence of this island. Um, and then, of course, St. Patrick on the right, which holding this stick, which in every single picture is completely different looking. But there's a lot to unpack here, and it's kind of interesting. So Robert Flaherty's film is a very interesting piece, very beautiful piece of cinema, but also highly contrived. And he was known for his Nanook of the North film as well, which was like a big deal in America and throughout Europe as well. But they were kind of pitched almost as documentaries when they were very far from it. Um, so he kind of had this as his first starting point, and I guess it's basically all he had to go on. So that's kind of like the starting point for this escapade, a sort of, I guess, a sort of an illusion. But I do think that his motivations were perhaps more reckless than frivolous. I do think he was seeking out a kind of culture or society that was not overrun or territorialized by culture. And at the time, there would have been, I suppose, very little information available to him. And the fact that he couldn't speak English or Irish and didn't have any money kind of speaks to how much of a venture or a risk it was, and him kind of setting off to go to this place, a very unlikely kind of episode. Um, okay, so I'll talk a little bit maybe later on about what became of the stick and what we do know historically of it. Um, so because we're discussing territory and place, I sort of wanted to bring in a couple of maps just to sort of set the kind of scene in terms of the locations involved. So also to put in context, it's important for me to kind of explain that this was sort of begun during the COVID lockdown. So although, as per the previous slide, it mentions Cove as a kind of starting point for the entry point from France, and then Inishmore as the kind of main stage for it. For the most part, at the very beginning, I was stuck in Dublin. And as we're all familiar with, there was this kind of peculiar 5 kilometer radius or whatever at the time that we were kind of all orbiting within. And I was undertaking my MFA at the time. So basically, it was a matter of kind of being in this peculiar situation where we kind of had to work with what we had in terms of what we had access to geographically or within the parameters surrounding where we lived. And at the time, I was kind of like stuck around this area, spending a lot of time every day walking around. And I I don't remember the precise moment that it occurred to me, but I remember at the time reading about Artaud, who I was familiar with. But when I kind of read about the Irish episode again, and I was kind of struck by the fact that, he had been in Mountjoy and that it was just down the road, and it was kind of like interesting in a way. Um, and then as I researched a bit more, the kind of Christchurch Cathedral element, which basically is that this holy stick, as it's reported historically, was stored here from the 1100s up until the around the Reformation and was a famous relic. And the mythology around this, or the history around it, is that this stick was passed on indirectly from Jesus to St. Patrick, and it was venerated as a holy relic. Um, and it was reportedly destroyed in 1538 in Skinner's Row, which we'll talk about in a minute, uh, by a Protestant archbishop who were trying to clamp down on the existence of relics at the time. So I kind of thought this was an interesting part of it as well, and that's when I kind of felt maybe there was a sort of connections to be made to build up project. But the problem, I guess, was how to photograph this, really. Um, so this is a historical picture of Mountjoy Prison. This is kind of like I spent a lot of time walking up around here around the canal area during lockdown. as it happens, like there's very little to photograph. Like the first pictures, I'll show you some of them are quite nondescript. It was kind of a dead end in a way, but I had to kind of get the ball rolling. So I started photographing in these different areas. And initially I had all these like darkroom prints, these very darkened kind of pictures printed on expired darkroom paper. I made a lot of these. I took a lot of like more pictures than I needed of the same places over and over because there was just nowhere to go for the time being. So these kind of sketches, and this as well, some darkroom prints. Um, so in addition to that, just to touch again on the Christchurch, just historically here, I was wondering where Skinner's Row was, which is in the record as being the place where this relic was destroyed, and it shows up here on older maps. Um, and it's right in front of Christchurch Cathedral. So it's where Jury's Hotel is basically. And I found a historical map that has the original names as well. But what's interesting is when Artaud left Inishmore, he ended up back in Dublin and he was fairly destitute. He ended up staying in a homeless shelter, which is actually here and still exists. So that was another kind of interesting connection. Like he stayed basically a stone's throw away from where this relic was supposedly destroyed back in the 1500s. So I was kind of visiting these places as well. Also, kind of like a little bit awkward to photograph and a bit far removed maybe from the main story, but this is kind of all I had to work with at the beginning. Um, so the next thing was I did take a trip to Cork just as soon as the first opportunity came to travel during the lockdown. I went down on my own for a night just to potter around and also just to get the ball rolling in terms of shooting in other locations, just thinking about it a bit more. Again, not sure exactly what I was looking for, just to have the experience and to get into the mode of photographing and thinking about it. So I'm going to show as well like bits and pieces of my research, my kind of research books and um, that contain images and text and stuff that I was compiling along the way. I have, as I was preparing, I dug out these, I have all these sleeves for different periods during the project where I made compilations of mostly iPhone photos that I printed out for each kind of stage of the process. So they start off in Dublin, and then there's this kind of co-visit. And then subsequently, when things kind of started to open up a bit more, I was able to make four visits to Inishmore over a period of 4 years, I think. So I'll show you these are the kind of just prints. They're kind of for myself, but it was interesting to look back because the process of making the work is quite well documented. So that was kind of interesting to, it kind of brought me back to it and to this very particular atmosphere that we were all living in at the time. There was practically nobody there at the time, so it was really interesting to kind of experience it in this way. Um, okay, so this I'm going to show some of the work um, that I started making during these visits. So I brought in I explored a number of different techniques. This is a still from Super 8. Um, I also use Polaroid a lot in this project, and I suppose I'll talk about that first. I was sort of exploring different ways of photographing because, again, it was a difficult kind of. I had to kind of invent or design kind of strategies to approach the subject matter and figure out a way of doing it, which was kind of indirect and maybe spoke to some of the more like conceptual concerns rather than serving as any kind of like documentary or anything. Um, so basically, I was experimenting with, in this instance, with like fogging these Polaroids, which are quite light sensitive and unstable. So the modern Polaroids, you're told to kind of protect them from light after you shoot. And for the first while, I tried leaving them out in the sun and just seeing what kind of artifacts and fogging would develop. Um, and it was interesting. It kind of led to shooting a lot more photos just because there was some stuff that became unusable. But it was an interesting kind of way to test the limits of the format, and then as time went on, I kind of used this approach a bit less. But I'll just show you some examples of the Polaroids from the project. Um, you can kind of see the hue a lot in these where they are fogged. They kind of change the temperature of the color changes a lot. Also, this was something I was messing around with 35 mil for quite a while before this, where I was deliberately fogging, pre-fogging, and my negatives and prints. So sometimes fogging the negatives, I did that for quite a while, which is obviously quite destructive and sometimes interesting. And then in the darkroom as well. So these are just some like work prints and sketches. There, I don't think most of these are in the project, but it's just to give an idea of the kinds of things I was trying out. Um, yeah. And then these are some of the more straight images that made it into the project. This, I don't think this one is in there, but just to give you a sense of the different kinds of approaches. Um, and then Super 8 is another big part of the project. And I've been using Super 8 on and off for some years, and I kind of use it heavily in the preceding project. Um, and I was very interested in exploring this overlap and the interplay between still images and moving images, and also just the aesthetic qualities of Super 8, which has a quite a, you could say like a low fidelity kind of. The negative is so small that it doesn't render detail all that well all the time. So this was a kind of really severe limitation, which helped. I think I'm kind of interested in these limitations. It also played into the idea of not documenting things too clearly or too directly, but to come up with kind of various techniques to add kind of multi-dimensional approach. So the approach I took was to kind of arrange stills into grids where there's elements of movement. Sometimes it's more detectable than others. Um, and I really enjoyed the kind of the breakaway from maybe like the primacy of the still image in or a singular image in photography, and these kind of combinations or sequences that kind of imply movement, but they're also stills, and there is variations. There is some movement in some of them, um, and there's some artifacts as well. Depending, these I think are handheld, so some of them are blurred. It was also to do with conserving film because I didn't have the money to shoot a ton of Super 8, so I shot tons of really short sequences. So I only had, sometimes it's only about this amount of frames that I had to work with. So these are some examples. A lot of these aren't in the installation either. So again, it was just about trying to capture something atmospheric, something impressionistic, rather than something that was like, yeah, like documentary. This is another example of shooting. And as well, I was making field recordings in each of the locations, and these were used, they were mixed in to create this sort of sound installation as well for the exhibition. I found these while I was kind of going back through a lot of iPhone photos and things. Thought this was kind of interesting just to show some of the black and white. There's not that much black and white Super 8, but I shot a few rolls. There's not that much in the project, but there's a lot of additional materials, and the black and white stuff I did develop myself, and it's quite a crude or improvised sort of approach. This is done in my darkroom, and I remember hanging these out on the clothesline in my mom's garden, and it's like they're 50 foot of film per reel, so they're actually crazy to handle because they get really tangled. And but that's how they were made, and yeah, so I'm just going to show some of the other. bits and pieces. Most of this some of it's in the artist books that I made for the installation in the Image Center. So this kind of approach to, I suppose, intervening or damaging or distorting the roles. It comes about through, as some of you will be familiar with, this kind of burning Super 8 happens when you slow down the projector and the bulb, the heat from the bulb starts to melt the film basically. And I've been trying this out on and off for years, but I never like got to digitize the results. So it's often very beautiful, and you can actually control it quite a bit once you've kind of done it enough over time. So there was this kind of a motif emerging as well of this kind of like empty space, this gap, of this kind of like void or something at the center of the images. And I thought this was an interesting avenue to explore in that it sort of is a kind of interruption in the process of image making. It's a sort of break with the supposed reality that's being recorded by the camera, and it creates this sort of empty space. And I thought it was an interesting way to explore this sort of episode and this kind of reading the text of Artaud as well and what he was going through. It kind of resembled a sort of a breakdown or breakthrough of sorts, depending on how you want to read it. And I thought this was a way of like kind of speaking to that somewhat. And I'll show you an example of another item that it kind of references. So these are also following the same theme, but they're done in the darkroom. These are 35mm images, which uh, may be in the artist book. There may be one or two of these. Um, but they kind of reference this, which was a big part of these letters that Artaud was writing. Like there's a collection of his letters from that he wrote while he was in Ireland, but he was sort of um, getting a bit more unstable, I guess, and he was sending these letters. He used to burn holes in them, and they kind of were supposed to function as curses of sorts uh, to be inflicted upon the recipient. I think this one is supposed to be to Roger Blinn, who he was a collaborator with in the theatre, who also, as you might know, put on, I think, maybe the first production of Waiting for Godot with Beckett in Paris. So these are interesting. I think those are the front and back of the same letter, but I found them in different places. Um, so this is just the installation, just to kind of begin to close it up. And I also wanted to maybe just uh, mention a bit about the this idea of the of territory that we kind of have as our theme. Um, and I think like I was reflecting on it for the talk, and I think a lot of my work, like as I mentioned, kind of at the beginning, is to do with this interplay between like subjective experience and the kind of experience of the world, the kind of inner worlds and outer worlds, and this how these kind of spaces interact. I think the work has a lot to do with interiority in a way, and um, as I was sort of and like in such a way that like you recognize when you're trying to make work in this manner that there's only like so much of that that's really like transferable or communicable. And we're trying to find language or syntax with our given medium to kind of facilitate this. There's an interesting just to kind of like reflect back on those images with the sort of like burn marks and the gaps. There's as part of the research I was reading about landscapes and photography in particular. And there's an interesting quote by Liz Wells, who has an interesting book on this, which I can share. I have a bibliography as well if people are interested. But she talks about this kind of idea of indeterminate spaces, and this is something that speaks to my practice, I think, quite a lot. But she talks about this sort of like when there's a kind of lack of information or lack of designation. And she says to be void is to be meaningless, to lack designation. This in-betweenness may be taken as an arena of slippages, testifying to the fluidity of meaning. And I thought that was really interesting because it was kind of like about the unphotographability of reality in a way, or human experience. Um, and while it has like photography has an extraordinary facility to record or describe things topographically, um, it can't necessarily convey the reality of lived experience in the same way. So the last point I wanted to make, and hopefully I'm not running over, is just about kind of like a definition of territory in a sense. Um, and it made me think about like one definition read as like an area where one has certain rights or responsibilities. Um, and I was thinking of it in terms of like one's art practice or whatever, like uh, how it's a sort of like it's kind of if you're talking about like territory is also like inner space that we kind of as artists or practitioners are always trying to kind of find a language using our given medium to sort of bring some of this inner experience or insight to bear on the world at large. Um, and I think my work has always been about setting up an arena or an environment where I can explore the overlap and tension between these inner and outer spaces and to kind of find a language with through photography that can be used to explore or express some of this. Um, and then also secondarily, like just how our practice as well is a kind of territory that an artist occupies in society, and it's a sort of a contested space in a sense. Um, that we have this responsibility to develop and find forms of expression within our various medium, but there's also this kind of often marginalized or it's sometimes considered superfluous in a mainstream kind of setting. So those were some of the thoughts I had in relation to like the theme of the talk. Um, and then again, just to finish, these are just some a little publication I made for the exhibition, and I think that's pretty much it. Just want to say thanks to you guys for including me, Angel and Julia and the team at PhotoIreland. Also to the Arts Council, I got an Agility Award at the beginning of this, which really helped me develop the project. And thanks very much to the other artists involved. It's been really amazing getting to know everyone and finding out more about their work. Um, so yeah, thanks a million.
Thank you very much, Billy. There's a lot to thank you for as well, in sharing, being so kind to share with us, both in the exhibition and today through your talk about your process and about ideas. And it's very interesting how perhaps you build those parallelisms between um, that sort of capacity or lack of capacity of the photographic to represent those more obscure and inner worlds. Perhaps sound, because maybe you can tell us a bit more about what sort of sound is there in the gallery. I'm sure all the guests that are joining us today have been to the exhibition space, but those that haven't, perhaps you can tell us a bit more about that particular sound.
So the role of sound, you mean, in the installation?
The rural sound, and specifically the one that you have created.
Yeah, like it's interesting. I had in previous years often made slideshows to accompany photo series where there would be like a soundtrack, and I had the experience where it was sometimes like kind of was too much or it was unnecessary or it affected too much how people would see the images or you're setting the tone in a way that's maybe a bit too emphatic. But I had a show earlier in the year in Drogheda and we did this sound installation that was a lot more ambient, a lot more kind of open-ended, and it worked very well. I think it's something more to do with like it, I guess, creating a soundscape that's less emphatic or like directional in terms of its like let's say emotional tenor and more about just creating almost like a sound bath that people step into, and it kind of breaks the tension sometimes in a gallery space when there's just this sort of like bed of sound. It kind of creates maybe in the same way that when we go to the cinema, like it's kind of mind expanding the combination of images and sound. It's very immersive. So I think it's about striking a balance between, you know, setting up a mood that sort of prescribes a certain way of experiencing it, and then just creating a sound that just gives a sense of openness and um, yeah, that's it basically.
Mhm. Very well, thank you. And I suppose in terms of subscribing yourself to a particular photographic tradition, and we don't need to answer now, but maybe we can leave you thinking about that, and I'm sure you don't need to think about it too much, but we can talk about it after Jerry Loughlin's presentation.
Thank you. Thanks, Billy. That was great. So yeah, I'd just like to start off saying like, yeah, thanks to Angel and Julie and everyone at Photo Ireland and all the judging panel as well for selecting this work. And thanks for Brian Gregan for this photo that I've used of the installation. So yeah, I'm Gary. So I'll be talking about the work What Makes an Island, which is on show in are we calling it the ICI now, or the International Centre for the Image? So yeah, the project looks at this lump of granite in the North Atlantic. Well, I'll go into that a bit more in a minute. Looks at that and looks at as about a disputed physical location. But for me as well, it's also this imagined place as well. So yeah, I'll go and just a bit about myself. I'm from Mullingar. I'm based in Bristol at the moment. But yeah, I think in relation to the themes here, like we were talking about, like kind of like speculation landscape, like my practice, kind of yeah, changed, or at least my approach to projects changed if quite a bit over the last few years. So previously I would have worked like with directly what's in front of me, and I like traveling through the landscape and photographing places and people. But yeah, like that kind of changed around the time, excuse me. There we go. Um, with a project that I worked on called the Clearing House. Just very briefly, like this was looking at like KGB activity in Ireland in the early 80s. And it was this was the first time I was working on a subject matter that was like historical, which brought up kind of new challenges or exciting ways for me to consider how I make work. Particularly with such a story as well that would have like elements of espionage, like that definitely brought up a kind of new challenge because it forced me to explore new strategies in terms of developing a project. Like even with the 30-year release of information, there was still a lot of information withheld. So yeah, so I was relying a lot on kind of media speculation and local speculation. A lot of this played quite a big part in how the project came together. I still did maintain like an element of like traveling to locations, meeting people and interviewing people. But I had to introduce elements of staging and bringing in archive material just to help me with some of the shortcomings I was experiencing in terms of the way I was working with this kind of subject matter. So yeah, and I developed this project during my MA in documentary photography at University of South Wales. And this was under Lisa Bernard, who is an absolute powerhouse, and her approach to like she approaches documentary in a very, very extremely broad sense. So like that really opened a lot for me in terms of how I thought about my practice. Um, so yeah, and similar some of the things that Billy mentioned there in terms of COVID and lockdown, like it got me thinking like that experience as well was also quite a catalyst in terms of thinking about how I approach work. Again, we were all locked in, so yeah, I couldn't. I couldn't travel anywhere, so I needed to find new ways to produce work like from home essentially. So yeah, that kind of brings us up to where we are now at what makes an island. So yeah, this is Rockall that I mentioned. Now I've come across this while I was researching for the clearinghouse. So I've been ruminating on this lump of rock for quite a while now. So it's a granite outcrop. It's in the North Atlantic. It raises 7.5 meters above sea level, and its base is 31 meters long and 25 meters wide. And it's, as you can see, it's uninhabited except for seabirds. So yeah, just to give you an idea where exactly it is. As you can see, there's not much around it. So it's roughly 423 kilometers from Tory Island, Donegal, and 301 kilometers away from St. Kilda in Scotland. But people have spent time in Rockall, so there've been like numerous record attempts and who can stay there the longest. The longest so far has been Nick Hancock, and that was in 2014. And he spent 45 days alone on the island or on the rock. But yeah, you can see here this area here, and it's also there. Um, that's called Hall's Ledge, and that is about 3.5 meters by 1.3 meters. So you can see there's not a lot of space. This is Greenpeace. They were there in 1997, and they stayed there for 42 days. And while they were there, so they were claiming it for the people and the ocean. And while they were there, they renamed Rockall Waveland. And they were the record holders up until Nick Hancock in 2014. There has been a recent just last year. There's a recent record attempt. I think he only managed 32 or 36 days. Like the rock all gets pounded by like large waves, and yeah, like I think his little container for his supplies were knocked off, so he had to call the mission off. But I've been keeping an eye, and he is talking about going back again. Um, so yeah, why am I interested in Rockall? So in 1955, Britain annexed Rockall. So and this made it like this is the last land grab of the British Empire. So just like Britain were preparing to test, like it was a joint effort. It was American made Corporal missile off South, which is an island in the Outer Hebrides off the coast of Scotland. And while they were developing this launch base, there was concern that the Soviets and fears that the Soviets might use Rockall as a location to gather information on the testing. So it was landed in 1955, and then it was claimed under the interest of national security. Excuse me. I don't think there's much concern for natural, but yeah, it's this annexing was contested, and it still is contested. But at the time it was contested by Iceland, Denmark, and Ireland. Now Ireland and Iceland and Denmark, they're not making the same kind of claim. But yeah, I like so Ireland's not claiming sovereignty over Rockall themselves, but they are disputing it over like maritime entitlement, and so they're not interested in claiming it, but they are challenging Britain's claim to it. So yeah, so like under like international maritime law, like places like Rockall as like it's incapable of sustaining any kind of inhabitation or economic life. So it can't, the sovereignty of it can't be claimed. But yeah, since Brexit, Rockall and this claim has come back into the news. So like after Brexit, the access for some water for like fishing rights has changed, and this is what kind of brought the dispute of Rockall back into focus. And so like Britain's claim for it, like in the government's eyes, is it'll secure that area for their fishing rights and nobody else. So yeah, and like there's been times now in the recent few years where Irish trawlers have been like reporting that they have been like forced or discouraged from the area and finding it harder and harder to fish in the area. There is also fishing's not there is potentially oil and gas as well in the area, but that hasn't yet been explored. So yeah, the work itself is a multidisciplinary project with photography, video, and archive material. And yeah, I'm with the work I'm examining like broader themes of territorial control, post-colonial legacy, and like the, the fluidity of borders as such, and like and the ease that some nations have in claiming this space. So yeah, it's still ongoing, and I'm continuing to shoot and still gathering materials. Um, so yeah, so for me, like the project started with Rockall as a physical space, but like as I kind of like to work through my research and start gathering materials and making imagery, like is really interesting way how like a place becomes meaningful through these images that were shown and these stories that like are like kind of brought to us and these different claims and acts of looking. So yeah, so rather than trying to get like a definitive portrait of it, like I said, I'm using like various different strategies. And yeah, look at Rockall both at like not just as like a lump of granite or a disputed space, but like it's something a bit more speculative and like kind of maybe a bit like a mythical like presence. Um so yeah, so like it's shifted quite a bit. So this is show some photos from a previous exhibition where like unlike what's in the International Centre for the Image, I suppose the images are standing on their own rather than kind of the way I've worked with layers later on in with the project. Um so yeah, this is almost more about the physical island and the and its location and its because like this exhibition its theme was all on islands. But yeah, I think where the work has gone now, it's again it's yeah, like working with more layers and yeah, been a bit more playful, I guess. Um so yeah, so what's on show in the International Centre of the Image is just yeah, it's a mix of photography, but my own and archive, as well as there's elements of maps and there's painting and illustration, but they're all kind of mixing together. And in terms of then like my process of getting into the project, so it was like I think, yeah, when I finished the master's was 2019, and then once that project was out of the way, I was kind of starting to think of other things. But yeah, again, echoing Billy there, it was coming into lockdown, so a lot of the research I was getting into was in terms of yeah, initially first whatever I could find online, and then like ordering like books or anything like that. Yeah, as well. So pretty much whatever I could bring into the house was my research. Um, but once I started to get out and about a bit more, I started like yeah, so I had like this big catalog of images of Rockall, and it's just studying at every angle and all various different interpretations, yeah, be it drawings or paintings. I'd start to photograph objects that would remind me, or I thought, or something some way might resemble Rockall. Um, and yeah, in turn, like there's stuff I've used. This is in the current exhibition. So yeah, I kind of fall. I'm sure everyone can rate this. I kind of fall in and out of favor in terms of like what works, what doesn't. I also started to delve back into my own archive and just finding like resemblances in like kind of archive material I'm finding elsewhere within my own archive. And again, it's just a matter, the process is just a matter of like kind of playing with stuff, having stuff up in the studio, experimenting with scale, until like kind of things started to slowly begin to sit on top of each other, and I started playing along a bit more with this, which is kind of similar to some of the stuff that's in the exhibition at the moment. Um, so yeah, like if I saw a like and still now if I see a map anywhere, like my reflexes like see if rock all's on it. And so even one day I was at a party and there was a child playing with this inflatable globe. And yeah, I found that how am I doing for time?
You're cool. You're cool. Carry on.
Yeah, and I noticed I had rock all, and I regret not offering to buy it, like, because they gave me the website it was on, so yeah, but I haven't managed to find it online yet, but I was very excited, more so excited that the fact that it said like it was labeled rock all, and like under UK, so yeah. So if anyone sees this on here, please let me know. I'd love to get my hands on one. Um, so yeah, so and like besides like using maps directly, like they've also like influenced in terms of how the work is beginning to develop in the within the project. So yeah, so this is yeah one of the images in the exhibition. So yeah, like, and I think my yeah, I think my interest in maps kind of were there before this project began to develop. And yeah, and again, I think this came up last week as well in Miriam and George's talk in terms of like maps are essentially like a tool of control. So like not just of like territory, but also like information and the knowledge that's shared about that territory. So I'm always interested in terms of like who are making these maps and like yeah and who's made this globe. So yeah. So like that, and that's another layer that's kind of bubbling in the work as well. Much like, and again, um, echoes some of the stuff that was in some of the themes I was looking at in terms of my previous project and that shift in my practice. That was also looking at control of territory and information. So yeah, like I mentioned, so like the ways these maps and images are then influencing how the work is developed. So like the data quality of the material I've gathered is definitely kind of shaping it. So and like how it looks and how I think about the project. So like the print technology at the time that you find in kind of older publications and newspapers, like this data technique, like when blown up, they become quite abstract. And for me, like it echoes like imagery of UFO sightings or images of like the Loch Ness monster. And like the real like when I realized like how much this has influenced it, like it kind of, yeah, like I said, change how I think about the work. Because I think when I initially started the project, I always envisioned myself that like there'll be some at some point I'm gonna have to like make my way out to Rockall. Um but as like I start kind of seeing it like this way, and like kind of I suppose it's always been this abstract place to me, but through working with this, I've somehow created this another layer of abstraction for me. So if like at the moment, yeah, there's a fear, concern, like if how how what kind of shape would the projects take if I ever do make it out there and document that experience. Like, w will it make everything that's come before it obsolete? Yeah, I don't know, but at the moment, I'm quite happy with like it being this like unattainable space. And again, like within Irish mythology, we have like like we do have mythical islands, like we have Tir na Nog and Hyperzil. Um, so yeah, so for me, account Rockall is amongst like that mythology. And I'm quite excited in terms of how it's kind of it's shaping a certain element of the work. Um, so yeah, it's and so w with that like and that line of thinking, and realizing that like the rock all itself has become this obsession for me. It kind of got me thinking, is that the work? Is the work the obsession? Or is it rock all? So I'm not going to show it today. I don't know if I'll ever show it or what kind of context it's going to sit in. Um, but yeah, I've been experimenting with how I visualize this obsession. So yeah, and there's been a number of ways I've been playing around with it. There's this one way where I've been sculpting rockall out of mashed potatoes. Very much like that. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that scene out of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. So yeah, just a straightforward two camera video, close up as you stay there with the hands, and then a wider one of myself in the process. Um, again, I'm not 100% sure what kind of context that's going to sit in, and or because I feel like some of the imagery that I'm using now at the moment is quite serious, and I'm just I'm trying to find a balance of where the humor sits. But yeah, it's like the work's still going on, so I think the a day or two before the exhibition opened, um I I spent a day with the bird collection in the Natural History Museum in Dublin. So yeah, I was kindly given access and shown around by Jamie Maxwell, who was a curator there. And yeah, on that day, I think we must have photographed over 30 specimens. This is just a small sample of them. So yeah, like because like that's how I tend to work with. I throw out a broad net and then kind of whittle it down. So I am now I'm after what kind of life is out there, and um minerals as well. Like there is a mineral called biserit, which has only been found on rockall. So I'm trying to get my hands on a piece of that. But like this visit was quite significant again in terms of ways of thinking because I never I um, like Jamie out there just opened my eyes to the fact that the colonial legacy of the collection that's in the Natural History Museum in Dublin is like it was originally a British collection, and now it's bestowed to the Irish, or maybe it's just left, I'm not sure. But again, echoing what I've been talking about in terms of the maps, that it is this again, there's an other form of kind of control of kind of knowledge. Yeah, and yeah, I suppose like map making is also a form of collection. So yeah, I think I'll kind of wrap it up there. So yeah, do I have anything to say? So yeah, like it is a like yeah, it's a lot of things for me, and I'm still, as you probably can figure out, I'm still making sense out of a lot of it. But yeah, like it is a contested territory. It's a Cold War relic. It's a fishing grounds, like it's a little dot on a map. And yeah, for like a lot of us, it's like it could be this mythical object because I don't think many of us are going to see it. Like they do say, like there've been more people on the moon than there have been on Rockall. So yeah, I think at the moment I'm happy to let all those kind of those versions of Rockall kind of sit together and yeah, and just show that there are these kind of different layers of meaning. Yeah. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Gary. At this point, maybe to remind all our guests, if they want to share any questions, they can put them in the chat, and we will administer them throughout the session. I find it very interesting, Gary, that you are talking around, I suppose, this island quite uh, as an investigation, I suppose, that has no conclusion, where there is a clear intention, but at the same time, there is no need for an end. And this approach is, I find, is quite rich, it's quite creative in the outcome, in the output. There is a nice variety of materials, but certainly um, quite aware of the graphical values, and there's an elaboration of the designs and these sort of speculative calculations that we don't know what they are. We're not invited to their meaning, but we accept them as such. Um, and this is coming from a master in photography documentary. Um, where perhaps, and maybe this is tied up with the question that I made to Billy in relation to how do you define yourselves and your practice, or what how do your practice sits on the context of contemporary photography, or on the tradition and the traditions that we were um, inherited, we have inherited. So um, I don't know if you have any thoughts around that, or if you have any concerns at all.
It's definitely a backbone to it. Yeah, but like there is well, at least in my own practice, there is a movement, not necessarily a way. Yeah, I am definitely interested playing with different forms of presenting the work. And yeah, I don't know. I think it's yeah, and I feel like it's that kind of interest or looking elsewhere just comes from yeah, I don't know. Like, yeah, maybe it's just with age and just you feel like time's running out and want to try new things, or um a sense of boredom, or um I just yeah, it's just sometimes feeling like there's a limitation. But I like it is all like it's still rooted in photography. I haven't started a project yet that doesn't have that grounding. I don't know if I've answered your question.
You
Um,
have in your way, I think is a perfectly valid answer. I think ultimately it is a quite an interesting approach, and you mentioned that one of your lecturers was Lisa Bernard, and we can see the connection there. I suppose she defines herself um, as a documentary photographer as well, although
mm,
she does pin down the herself as a political artist, so there is a particular intention. And I don't know, Billy, how do you respond to this?
I think it's a really broad kind of question. It's an interesting one. I think as well, like it changes over time. So like I've been focused really on using photography for about 15 years. So when I think back to what I was kind of interested in the first instance is quite different from what I'm interested in now. But I suppose there is a sort of a kind of connection. Um, I think I was always interested in sort of photographers who had a fairly like strong subjective kind of point of view and kind of an expressionist point of view. So people like Robert Frank or Moriyama or some of the European photographers like Ed van der Elsken or Nan Golden, these kind of like Christer Stromholm, Swedish photographers as well, and Engstrom. So people who had quite a like, I suppose, strong subjective perspective and also sort of like room for atmosphere and a slight kind of a poeticism as well. Um, and that's something I think that really informed my work for the first few years. And as time went on and as I got more into research, I think I really became interested in like the beginning of photography, the very early experiments by people like Hippolyte Bayard and Henry Fox Talbot, and these very like chemical partial traces of like how images were attempted to be created in the very first instance, and how these are still quite beautiful to look at and in an odd way, almost like contemporary in their own way. So that's something that during my research, just before making this project, I was looking at a lot. And in addition to that, these days I'm very much drawn into artists who use photography rather than photographers. So that's kind of what piques my interest a little bit more these days. And again, during the research period, I would have been looking at people like Gerhard Richter a lot, and again, a lot of the kind of interviews and thoughts about visuals and the language of images as well. And of course, there's a lot of painters whose work is really built on photography. He's one of them. Even Anselm Kiefer's early books using photographs are very beautiful. Vija Kelman's as well, her work, and Dirk Brackman as well, who's a photographer, but has a very strong painterly quality to how he produces work and is very much about this kind of tension between what's visible, what's disappearing, the kind of lack of the emphatic. So there's loads of different things. And experimental film, of course, like which enters into it a bit, and kind of materialist experimental filmmaking, which, from the 60s onwards. So there's tons of influences, but that's just some of them, yeah.
Very well. I mean, found very interesting your statement earlier on, mentioning this sort of strive to against the primacy of the still image in photography, which basically that's connected with what you're saying. I do find interesting as well the connection in your practice with in the production of artists' books or photo books,
Yeah.
and that they are displayed and they are available for the public in this sort of like touch but don't touch way, and um, and also that search for almost or the appreciation of the imperfect image in terms of the more organic processes, I suppose, that produce this sort of interruption to on the image process, um, which in a way end up um, I mean, I will argue, enriching the that sort of visual vocabulary that you are bringing together in the same way that Garry he is actually distilling, a series of thoughts into these elements that are both um, photographic in the traditional sense, but then pretty much graphical.
Yeah.
So. Um, yeah, and I wonder if you see and these two stories particularly talking about these two islands. I mean, there was let's say that there was a clear connection there, but I wonder how do you feel about each other's practice and if you see something there or something to comment.
I mean, I found it really striking how parallels emerged with everybody whose work was involved, like the more we talked. And I think that as image makers, like there's a lot of like very there's running concerns. And I think it was very surprising and really like enriching to kind of see that. And with Gary's work, like and the language he's using now, like I love again this idea of the speculative, the not knowing, the kind of lack of information, the sort of like you reference like images that are almost like documents of UFO sightings, something that maybe it's there, maybe it's not, but it's that like thing with images that's so stimulating and piques our interest and kind of like the lack of information I think is extremely stimulating as well because we just want to fill in the gaps and that's the kind of work I really appreciate is work where there is kind of something missing, there is something kind of left out, or there's something that's kind of not quite fully there. It's because I think in all art forms, it really invites the viewer in, and that's kind of so essential for there to be some kind of sense of like it's not entirely resolved in the sense that you're bringing it to where you need to bring it formally, but in terms of like the actual information, it's not a thesis, it's not an argument, and you're kind of focusing on this, I feel, specifically because it has that really like mysterious quality to it, and that in and of itself is really, for me, super interesting and kind of inspiring. And there's all those other concurrent themes, like political themes and everything, which gives it a lot of richness. But it's also kind of like you say, there is an element of like levity or something where it's kind of like, are we all fighting over a rock? Or are we all contesting this piece of stone in the middle of the ocean that nobody can even hardly stand on? So I think it's a great project. I really enjoy that. And I think the relationship to mine is like obviously like the locations I'm looking at are more well defined, let's say, but there is all of that in the mix as well because it's so contested and people have like claim ownership in various respects. And I think this particular episode is this kind of chasing this idea, this kind of mirage, this kind of like place that doesn't really exist. And it's a kind of place that can mean all things to all people. So it has that illusory quality as well. It's tied into like the creative endeavor and how it is a kind of like an effort in just it's an imaginative, speculative effort.
Thanks, Billy. And yeah, I'd echo a lot of that. I think so. I was admiring Billy's work from afar, for a while now. Like we didn't meet until the exhibition opening, so
Yeah.
it was nice. But like, like, yeah, throughout like I don't know how many years I've seen your work now, but like it's always there's a very liminal kind of feel to how it like you make imagery or how you present it. And so that really um just just sucks you in. You want like for me anyway, at least it drew me in on it. Like I just see one image and I want to know more. And yeah, again, like it's quite interesting because like a lot of the photographers you mentioned as well, kind of, and this kind of like for me, my experience with them is like they give you like a whisper of something and of a
Right.
moment and I kind of get that from you as well. And then there's something very and then it's like the landscapes you're making. And now maybe like probably not, but like for me at least, again, that's all I can speak for is um for like not living at home and just seeing the landscapes depicted the way you make work is it's heartbreaking in a way.
Are you,
And
are you homesick?
yeah. But no, it's but in relation to us, yeah, I in terms of been put together, I can see it. I'm extremely flattered. Because there's such a delicateness to Billy's work that like I wish I had. So because sometimes I think we'd spoken about this during the so yeah there's um I don't know there's such a level of control within my work that I'm like I do try and shake off, but like I can see like how you kind of just almost. Oh, it's quite interesting when you're talking about like the your process of like melting the film with the bulb, and so but you've almost found a way to control it, and or there's a level of predictability to it, but still like you're giving yourself away from chance, which is something maybe I had in my work years ago, but like it's not there anymore. Um, so yeah, I'm going off on a tangent there, but yeah, so yes, yeah is the answer. I can see the connection is the short answer, and yeah.
It's okay, Gary. I mean, we have
Thanks, Garry.
this session to address any hidden traumas.
I just have to
Uh,
remember there's other people here.
it's a private conversation. Nobody will know. Uh,
Okay.
I think it's good to bring this out and discuss it. There was a question there, I suppose, for Gary in relation to the territory. So, in terms of territory and creating work about them, are you more interested creating works um, of the territories themselves or work about what those territories represent?
A bit of both, I'd say. Um so yeah, I suppose like it's kind of it's a lot like I definitely feel like I wouldn't be making this kind of work if I lived in if I lived at home. So before moving to Bristol, I was living in Belgium, and then while we're there, I just like I wasn't fully aware of like their history with the Congo, and then learning about that, and then just again just um I don't know. It was just shocking. And then then I moved here and still that context and like like I just reevaluating like the joint history between like England particularly and Ireland and Britain and Ireland. So yeah, and I like then I suppose because so I came over here to do the masters and like I initially envisioned doing my master's on the language border in Belgium. So I think that was my initial idea of territory. But it was yeah, but it was also like tied in with it was identity and territory. Been Irish and doing an MA in the UK, like there was a bit of a push for me to do a project on the border within Ireland, um, which I did, which I felt like there was a number of photographers already doing a great job. Kate Nolan of this parish been one of them, and I just didn't feel like I had like a strong enough like voice or visual way of yeah I don't know I just felt like it was probably too close to home or too out of my depth but like during that I'm like kind of panicking about not really having a good idea of a project. I did come across this is a very roundabout answer, sorry. um Come across the project, the story that led to the clearinghouse, but then that did turn into a territorial thing as well. So it's a lot of it is, I suppose the last two projects are about Ireland and Britain's relationship. So like while I was researching the Clearinghouse project, I realized that there was a border within Ireland, like not just the north south one, but like one closer to Dublin and cutting through parts of Dublin that was there, like as part like on the wishes of the British government. So an element of the story was the employees of the embassy couldn't travel more than 25 kilometers away from the embassy without reporting to the Irish authorities, who then had to report this information back to the British authorities. And this border cut through Dublin, Kildare, and Wicklow. And then that became a part because I walked and photographed along that border. And then so then this is a further extension of that territory. So yeah, but this is the first time I've worked with a territory that I'm not in. So yeah, so probably currently the answer to that question is it's the idea of territory. Um, so I think I need someone to just tell me if my answers are too long. Sorry. But yeah, I hope that was that answered your question.
It does. I mean, after all, Rockall, it is great distillation of the stupidity of colonialism, and all that surrounds all the problems that surround. I mean, you were talking about Belgium. I mean, again, I think in such a little with such a little example, or with such a little
Mm,
territory, so much to discuss as well. Um, so it's almost like so I wouldn't say like magic realism, but there's a sense of like it is so silly, so stupid that it becomes absurd, I suppose, is what
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
trying to get at. I suppose in your case, Billy, this is not about territory specifically, but the whole idea started with a particular story and that particular happenstance of Anthony Artaud, and I wonder if sometimes these are um, the context that we set ourselves um, as a starting point, but again, as in the case of Garry, there is no pretension of finding an end to this, and so I wonder, um, I don't know, perhaps you can share your thoughts now from this moment in time, looking back at the work and perhaps looking into the future of the nearest works process of 3 years, where has it? I suppose I'm trying to look at, where is it going, and how is this speculation going to proceed?
That's a good question as well. It's been a few years like that I've worked on it, and I think the last chapter of it that hasn't been fully explored is maybe like the moving image part and combining that with sound. So I think there's a lot of interesting footage that could be used in a very sort of in a sort of like experimental film sort of vein in combination with these soundscapes that I think could be quite interesting and immersive. So I was kind of toying around with some of that, and I think a screening maybe with a performance or something will be a good way to kind of create something immersive and quite like uh, just take it in a slightly another medium and maybe lean into that moving image part as well. Also, I think I would like to make a slightly more substantial kind of like publication with the images that I have. So it would be nice to kind of make something that I can kind of maybe round it off a bit, which one of the benefits to kind of choosing these parameters or having these parameters sort of arrive and working through them is that there is a kind of an end to it in a way. Like a lot of my other projects, I just keep going back and keep photographing and it never ends. But I think this, for me, does have a sort of, I think I've completed those parts. I don't really want to go back and add a lot more images. But I think the part that's left is the moving image and sound stuff, which I think is an interesting component.
We look forward to seeing the project, both projects evolve, I suppose. I think we're going to leave it there. I think the conversation could continue and perhaps will continue. I will like to thank you, Billy Kenrick, for your time and for letting us come into your house and to your mind. And the same to you, Garry. Thank you very much for letting us know more about your work. I'm going to remind everybody that there is another talk coming up on memory and the family archive. This time it will be in person at the International Center for the Image at 5 p.m. on Saturday, the 8th of August, with artists Debbie Castro and Kate Nolan. We'd love to see you all on the next talk, and we'll see you around.